One of these war movies got tanked by its own star before the studio could even touch it. Another had a director fired by Steve McQueen, who then spent the shoot sabotaging his own movie. And then there's the one where the cast had to evacuate because the Soviets actually invaded. These are the underrated 1960s war films Hollywood didn't want you to see. During World War II, a group of soldiers led by Sergeant Larkin must protect the Siegfried Line in France from an entire company of German combatants. This one's worth watching for the cast alone. Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Bob Newhart, stacked lineup. And as a war movie, it's decent. But the real story is what happened behind the scenes. McQueen was a nightmare. He clashed with the director, fought the studio, irritated his co-stars, and drank like it was a sport. The budget got slashed halfway through filming, so nearly every battle scene had to be shot on the same narrow stretch of land. The guns kept jamming, the props looked cheap, and the same German soldier had to die multiple times just to fill out the action. You can actually see McQueen struggling to fire his M3 grease gun in the final battle, not because he's acting, but because the blanks wouldn't fire properly. King Rat doesn't pull any punches. It's based on James Clavell's own experience in a Japanese prisoners of war camp, and you can feel that weight in every single frame. Denholm Elliott, who plays Larkin, didn't have to imagine any of this. He'd been a prisoner himself, shot down during the war, and locked up for years. Even director Brian Forbes admitted the production nearly broke him. After 62 days of filming, he said he could barely talk without choking up. The whole process drained him. And after all that, the movie bombed. The studio had no idea how to sell it. They tried to market it like a standard war movie, when it was anything but. This wasn't a story with heroes or rousing victories. It was bleak, it was harsh, and it was honest about what war does to people. American audiences weren't ready for that. King Rat came out while Vietnam was still being packaged as a clean, noble war. Nobody wanted to see a movie that ripped that fantasy apart. Forbes later said the studio screwed it from the start with cheap, dishonest marketing. Some countries outright banned it because of how it portrayed British officers and life in those camps. The real audience, the ones who would have appreciated what the film was doing, never showed up. This was supposed to be Sam Peckinpah's big breakout, his first big-budget studio film. Instead, it turned into one of the biggest disasters of his entire career. Major Dundee was meant to be a sweeping Western war epic, something grand and brutal. But from the jump, Peckinpah was at war with the studio. He blew past deadlines, ignored budget limits, and made it impossible to get anything done. The producers wanted him gone. The only reason he wasn't fired on the spot was Charlton Heston. Heston actually gave up his entire salary just to keep Peckinpah on the movie, and even he lost patience. At one point, he got so fed up with Peckinpah's drunken chaos, he pulled a sword on him, a literal sword, and threatened to kill him if he didn't get it together. But in the end, it didn't matter. The studio took the film away, butchered it in the editing room, and released a cut that Peckinpah wanted nothing to do with. He spent the rest of his life saying it was one of the most painful things he ever went through. And yet, despite everything, he also called it possibly the best picture he ever made. This is one of the most intense war films of the 1960s. The action looks massive because it was massive. Nothing here is faked. Every single train crash, that's a real train. No models, no tricks. When the Allied bombing hits, that's actual dynamite going off. The French Rail Authority had to widen the tracks anyway, so the filmmakers just used real explosives. You can see the shockwaves tearing up the ground if you look close. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Burt Lancaster fired the original director Arthur Penn just a few days in, said the movie was moving too slow. So he brought in John Frankenheimer, who turned the whole thing into an action thriller. Lancaster also insisted on doing all his own stunts, which sounds cool until he blew out his knee jumping off a roof. Production had to shut down for 2 weeks while he recovered. But he finished the movie, and it's one of the best war films of the decade. No question. On screen, this one is a massive, underrated war epic with constant action and some seriously impressive siege sequences. Charlton Heston and David Niven lead a multinational force trying to hold Peking. The scale is huge. 10 nations, non-stop fighting, and a script that moves faster than you'd expect from a film that most people don't even talk about anymore. Off camera, though, was a total mess. Heston and Ava Gardner couldn't stand each other. He thought she was a drunken train wreck. She thought he was a stiff, self-righteous bore. There's zero chemistry between them. Gardner eventually walked off set and just never came back. Meanwhile, director Nicholas Ray was falling apart. Constant fights with producer Samuel Bronston, endless stress. It all caught up with him. He collapsed mid-production and had to be replaced before the film was even finished. To top it off, the movie ended up banned in China. No surprise there. It's one of those war films that never stood a chance, not with everything happening around it. They were filming in Czechoslovakia in 1968, right in the middle of production, when the Soviets decided to invade. One minute it's a Hollywood war film, the next there are actual tanks rolling into Prague, and the cast and crew are scrambling to get out with whatever they could carry. They left behind unfinished scenes, entire sets, just dropped everything and ran. The chaos hit George Segal hard. Between the production nightmare and his own personal issues, he cracked. Had a breakdown, came close to quitting acting completely. Robert Vaughn was in even worse shape. He was outspoken against the Vietnam War, and when Soviet forces took over, they almost had him arrested. They thought he was an American spy. Everybody remembers The Great Escape when they think of McQueen, but this one barely gets brought up anymore. And it should, because McQueen is fantastic in it. But the behind-the-scenes story? That's where things went off the rails. McQueen clashed constantly with director Robert Wise, refused scenes, blew up over script changes, got so deep into his method acting that nobody could stand working with him. They filmed in Taiwan, which only made things worse. The heat was unbearable, typhoons kept halting production, and half the cast and crew got sick. And then came the political backlash. Some people said it was pro-imperialist, others thought it was a quiet anti-war statement. Nobody could agree on what the movie was actually saying, so everyone ended up mad at it for different reasons. The movie still earned McQueen his only Oscar nomination, but it's been mostly forgotten ever since. This one is a World War II comedy with Paul Newman playing a promoted buck private parachuted into Italy to rescue 5 captured generals. On paper it sounds like fun, but in reality it's kind of a mess. It was Newman's first time trying out a full comedy role, and the guy's just too sharp to fully pull off this aloof, goofy character. You can see his intelligence peeking through the whole time. He's spoofing a bit of his cool hand Luke persona, but it never quite lands. There are a couple clever bits, like the escape plan, or some gentle humor about Frigg bossing people around, but the movie bounces all over the place. The tone's inconsistent, the structure's shaky, and director Jack Smite, who had done solid work with Newman before, just couldn't hold it together here. Even Roger Ebert hated it. Said it felt like the movie had been made against its own will. I've seen lousy movies before, but never one that seemed ashamed of itself. Andre de Toth's final film stars Michael Caine in one of his grimiest war roles. The film's set in North Africa during World War II, and it follows a team of British commandos posing as Italian soldiers, sneaking behind enemy lines to blow up a German oil depot. What really makes Play Dirty stand out is how unapologetically cold it is. These guys don't care about glory or honor or even each other. There's a scene where they're pretending to be Italians to pass by a group of Arab civilians. One of the Arabs spots something's off, and without hesitation they gun them all down. It's not sadistic, it's just practical. They have a job to do and they do it. That kind of brutal mission-first logic runs through the whole film. Martin Scorsese actually talked about this movie once and said it best: Play Dirty isn't sadistic, but it's mean. The characters have no redeeming value, they just act, and that kind of nihilism hits hard. Especially in 1969, when the whole world was watching the Vietnam War unravel in real time. Attack on the Iron Coast is a British-made war film starring Lloyd Bridges as a Canadian commando officer leading a raid on a Nazi-controlled dockyard. It's based on real events, specifically Operation Chariot, which was one of the gutsiest missions of World War II. The real raid involved 622 men, and 169 of them were killed. It was a combined British Army and Royal Navy operation aimed at the Nazi-controlled dockyard in France. This is the kind of movie that got completely buried because it wasn't flashy. No big Hollywood budget, no sweeping score, no giant battlefield set pieces. What it does have is a ton of tension, a tight structure, and a focus on strategy over spectacle, which honestly makes it feel way more grounded than half the war movies people still talk about.